Hello, I'm Allison Thorpe, and this is God Talk, recorded and produced in the bluegrass state of Kentucky, the home of horses, hills, hiking, hillbillies, big trucks, wildcat basketball, and Daniel Boone, the state where guns are honored and shoes are optional. This is the show where science, faith, and culture are discussed openly.
Good afternoon and welcome to God Talk, a radio show where a rocket scientist and a medical doctor, who is also my pastor, talk about science and religion. I'm your host, Doug Thorpe, and with me as always is my co-host, Dr. Andy Wyatt. Today we're going to present the 15 brief proofs of God's existence. So, Dr. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Doug. Today is going to be a great show because we're going to present basically 15 brief proofs. Now, I say brief, and I'll try to keep them brief, but obviously some of these are complicated. We're going to try to make these, our target is to target the general audience, not people who are scientifically inclined or philosophically inclined, although, you know, some of them are deep. I mean, we're going to have to use some philosophical and scientific language. But the goal is in one show, 50 minutes or less, we're going to try to present 15 targeted arguments that should prove God's existence.
You're saying we're going to go over our 35-minute goal?
I'm saying we're definitely going. We may go an hour, yeah.
Okay.
But our goal is to get them out, and I chose the number 15 because I think these are probably the strongest 15 arguments. Now, having said that, we've already done some shows on some of these arguments, but I would venture to say we're going to need to do multiple shows that are 45 minutes long on, several shows on each of these arguments to really explain these in great depth. This show I want to be an overview that really gets the 15 out there.
So in computer terms, it'll be 15 brief proofs of God for dummies, right?
That would be a way to say it. Okay. Yeah, we hope so. Although, again,
hope we're nicer than that.
We'll try that, yeah. We'll try it. But okay. we are going to shoot for the general audience, but you correct me if I'm getting too deep. Okay. But first, this is God Talk, where we rightly divide the line between science and faith.
And this is God Talk, your partner while you commute to work, or a cure for the insomnia. Either it keeps you awake all night and you forget about needing sleep, or you sleep like a baby. Please go find God Talk at godtalk.com. You can find us on iTunes. You can find us, pretty soon on YouTube videos that are going to be uploaded.
And SoundCloud as well.
We
have listeners there. Yeah.
Please get the word out and share this with your friends. Okay,
all right.
Dr. Andy.
Okay, argument number 1 is called the Cosmological argument. Don't let that big word scare you. What we're basically talking about, the cosmos, or the reason for the universe. And this has 3 parts to it.
Sounds like the Big Bang.
That's involved in it. But it's not only the Big Bang, it's what the Big Bang implies, okay? So the first point is anything that begins to exist has to have a cause. Now, I don't think anybody would argue rabbits don't pop into being. Dogs don't pop into existence. They have to have a cause. Chairs have a cause. Buildings have a cause. Anything that you think of had to have a cause. And so the first premise says anything that begins to exist had to have a cause. The second thing is the universe began to exist. That's where the science comes in. And the third thing is, therefore, the universe has to have a cause because it began. Now, the first premise is pretty easy here. I don't think anybody would argue, Doug, that things come into existence by themselves. Do you?
No, you gotta
have a cause, right? Cause and effect.
I've never seen a rabbit just pop out of the.
It doesn't happen. Yeah. Okay. So things come into being only when they're caused, and I think people would grant that. The second one, the universe began to exist. Some people might argue that, but I would say the nature of science today gives us proof that the universe actually did indeed begin. Do you agree?
It's kind of ironic that I've actually, the scientists are the ones who are proving that for us. They're the ones claiming, hey, the universe started with a Big Bang.
It started, yeah.
And they get down to I'm going to talk about 1 nanosecond after the Big Bang about how big the universe is, but yeah.
Yeah, so basically what we're saying is nothing comes from nothing. So if you have nothing, you get nothing. So there was a point where we had nothing before the Big Bang, and then there was an instant singularity, and then it began to expand. And so the Big Bang, science proves that the universe began to exist. And we say anything that begins to exist has to have a cause. So the thing is, we're saying if it started to exist, something had to bring it into existence, something outside of itself, right?
Well, I like your argument is if there was a Big Bang, then there had to be a Big Banger.
That's right. Big bangs require big bangers. And so that's what we had to do. And who was the Big Banger? The question is, it wasn't an it, I believe it was a who. And I have other arguments to say that I think it should have been. There's really only two things that could have brought it into existence. One is a mind, like God, and the second will be an abstract object, and that's for a deeper show. But those would be the two things we could say, and I think the most likely argument is that God brought it into existence. And that had to be an uncreated being that wasn't made, something outside of space-time, brought in space-time into existence. So that's the cosmological argument in that.
Okay. All right. How about...
Okay.
And by the way, we're presenting 15 arguments for the proof of a God. All 15 have to be disproven in order for there to be no God. They have to be disproven. All 15.
All 15 would have to be disproven. That's
right.
Okay.
All right. So number 2 is design.
And these will make a cumulative argument as well, all 15 together. Design. That's right. Design. Order, purpose, and complexity. We all know what complicated things are. We all know what it means to have purpose in life. When you see design, you look for a designer. Just like when you hear a Big Bang, you look for a Big Banger. When you see design, you look for a designer. When you look at this world, it looks like it was designed. It appears to be designed. The intelligible order of the cosmos, biological life, beauty. It's either one of two things. All this we see, the trees, the sun, biological, all the wonderful life that we have, everything we see in this universe is either one or two things. An accident, it just came about, and it created all that design, or it was created by a mind. It had to be one of the two things. Now, let me give you just a few examples for why I think design is a good argument for God. If the rate of expansion of the universe had been just a fraction slower, 1 in a million, the Big Bang would have been followed by a big crunch.
All right.
Okay,
Well,
that's just one example.
Well, let me give you a quick...
That it had to be just like that.
Let me give you a brief.
Okay.
All right. This is from a technical report from he's a scientist, a non-Christian scientist, talking about the density of the universe 1 nanosecond after the Big Bang was 1 billion times 1 billion times 500,000. That's a big number, right?
A lot of zeros.
And you're talking about grams per cubic centimeter. So the whole solar system, our solar system, would fit in 2 of our churches, to give you some idea. The whole universe will fit a little bit bigger than the moon's diameter.
Okay.
That's the whole
size it would have been.
After 1 nanosecond.
1
it is,
nanosecond.
And it keeps on expanding for another 300,000 years before it cooled down enough for matter to actually start forming. But now, I gave you that number, 500,000 times 1 billion times 1 billion. And if you increase that by 0.2, well, like you said, if that density
Just
increased by 0.2, then you would already have a crunch. If it was
it would have expanded and then crunched.
Right. And if it decreased by 0.2, then we wouldn't be able to see other galaxies. It would have expanded so far out that we would not see other galaxies. So that's 1 billion times 1 billion times 500,000 plus 0.2. That is a very finite. Plus or minus 0.2. And you're
right. If you change just that number, 0.2, you're talking about, it's within 0.2. That's the point we're telling the non-math people.
Yeah, it had to be within plus or minus 0.2 of that big, long, many zeros. And this is a technical report from scientists, right?
So see, that spells design. That's got design written all over it. That's a great example of what I'm talking about. Another example would be if there's a strong and weak nuclear force, the gravity, proton to electron mass ratio, all these things are just set. They're within a razor's edge, is the way I say it. Within a razor's edge, they're set. If the strong force were as much as 1% different, almost all the carbon would have been turned to oxygen. So it had to be within 0.8 within its level. So not as much as 0.2, but that's pretty finely tuned. This has compelled scientists to conclude that this delicate balance cannot simply be dismissed as a coincidence. Just scientists. I mean, not even talking about theologians here. And so our arguments today that focus on design, there's lots of different ways to talk about the design argument, many shows we could do. But I think the best way to do it is to look at all of these constants in the universe and physical laws and say they're designed on a razor's edge for life to exist. There's a purpose
for
right?
Earth to exist. Anything. Because
for planets, for matter.
Yeah.
Let alone have biological life. So I think the design argument's very powerful for God. It really looks designed. And even atheists say, well, it looks designed, but it isn't. Well, I don't understand that, but yeah. Okay, we got to keep moving.
All right.
Number 3 is the moral argument. We've talked about this before, but according to this argument, there couldn't have been such a thing as morality without God. To use the words of Jean-Paul Sartre, he said, he attributed this to Dostoevsky, if there is no God, then everything is permissible. Now, we know that's not true. People know that you can't just do whatever you want. There are moral values that exist, no matter where you live.
And that's called, the atheists will push back and say that's, the herd mentality. The reason why we have these set of rules is because it's good for the herd. But I say to them, what about clothing? Where does clothing come from as far as good for the herd? I mean, you've got clothing on people who live right in the middle on the equator. They don't need clothing by any manner, for any reason.
Sure.
Not because they're cold, but they still have clothing. So the only reason why you have clothing is for moral reasons, and
that's an example. But let me go farther with it. We're not talking about herd mentality because that's subjective moral values, because that would be dependent. That could change over time. What I'm saying is objective moral facts exist that are like mathematical laws, like 2 + 2 = 4, and 20 divided by 10 is 2. Those things can't be changed. I don't think morals are changeable. That would be what we call subjective or relativistic morality. I'm saying if objective morals exist that are facts, like the capital of Indiana is Indianapolis, that's a fact. We can't change it. It's not going to change tomorrow. We can go back 20 years, it's still the same. Moral facts are set. They're prescriptive. They're prescribed. They're the way things ought to be. And I talk about oughtness.
Right.
There's an oughtness to the world. And I believe that moral facts are commands that had to come from a mind, not from an it. Okay, because moral facts had to come from something outside of space-time. Again, something transcendent beyond morality. And we all agree that morality has an authority in this world. And people agree on moral facts. You can have some wiggle room here or there, but I'm not saying whether or not people agree or not, if moral facts exist, and those are the rules that we play by, then they had to come from a transcendent being. That's an argument for God's existence.
I like your explanation. If you have a ball game, you got to have somebody above the ball, who made the rules.
That's the way I like to explain it. A referee. Otherwise, you just got mayhem, changing the rules, and you can't change the rules.
All right. The fourth argument is purpose.
Purpose has also been called the anthropic principle, which means that the universe, if you look at it, appears to be going somewhere. It appears to be moving towards a point. It's not just randomly happening. It's not just following entropy and becoming more disorganized. It's actually been becoming more organized, taking energy and actually forming a purpose. And we can see this. If it were simply an act of random chance, it seems implausible that we would clearly see evidence of so much purpose. Systems working together for a grand purpose. We see this in many different ways. We see it, let me give you an example of reproduction. When we look at human beings, they have the male and female sex organs are perfectly designed towards a function to produce reproduction, to produce offspring. Now, you can take the male sex organ without getting too graphic, and the female sex organ, they just fit like they're supposed to. They work together nicely. That looks like a system that's interdependent, designed to reproduce something.
Right. Well, but that's been evolved over time, though, over millions of years to get those perfectly sex organs.
Well, but I mean, it's not talking about, why did it happen that way? The argument isn't talking about whether it's evolution or what. It's saying that And when you see purpose, okay, this is the argument. When you see purpose, and that's just an example. We could use many different ones, okay? When you see the fact that oxygen, we breathe in oxygen, and we breathe out carbon dioxide, okay, is an example. When we do that, it just so happens that we have oxygen in the atmosphere to breathe in, and the carbon dioxide comes out and then is used by the plants. See, that's an example of two different systems working. You see the argument? That doesn't look like an accident. That looks like there's purpose, that somebody had an idea to make it that way. There's interdependence between systems. It's unlikely that would happen by chance.
Well, and I've also read, this goes back, talking about the evolution of the planet, that for 4.6 billion years of the planet's existence, humans can only survive in the last, the last 50 million years? They couldn't have survived when the dinosaurs were, because of the amount of CO2 in the air, and there wasn't enough oxygen, and except for during the Carboniferous period. Otherwise, when the dinosaurs were on the ground, Cretaceous period and Jurassic period, there wasn't enough oxygen. It's too low. So,
so I mean, don't you say that if you look at the whole purpose, if you look at the whole universe, as long as it's existed, it looks like it's been moving towards something. That's my point. You see, you talked about the universe nanosecond after expansion. It looked a lot different than it does now.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and it looks a lot different than it did 50 million years ago and a billion years ago. If you look at it through the whole thing, it's just like if you're watching a movie, okay?
Right.
If you're watching a movie, it starts out with some characters or whatever, and it starts to develop a plot, and then it has some highs and lows, and then it meets a conclusion, okay? When you watch that movie, you wouldn't think, I suppose all that stuff just sort of fell together and landed on screen. I mean, you would say, no, of course, minds put that together to form, it's a purpose. It's going somewhere, right? It's telling a story. It's not just random incidents that just pop up on the screen. It's moving somewhere. That might be the best way to explain it. And as we look at the universe as a whole, we see systems working together, forming an interdependence. If it were random chance, it seems just impossible that it would form such a purposeful system. Contemporary science reveals to us that our world system is not merely an aggregate of many separate, unrelated laws, but a tightly interlocking whole, where the relationships to those structures determine the parts. And so you get things like sex organs that work. When you look at that, you look at those organs, you say, they just happen to come together. No, I don't think so. I don't think it's an accident. So that's related to the design argument, but it's different because it's talking about moving through time with purpose.
All right. Okay? Next one is degrees of perfection.
All right. Doug, we all live with the understanding that things exist in degrees, right? Whether it's temperature. If you make cookies tonight when you go home, when you first take them out, they're going to be hotter than they will be 10 minutes later. There's a description of hot, mild, eventually cold. Everything in the world we describe as shades of gray, moving away that way. Now, here's the deal. We also recognize that there are inherent good qualities, and we gravitate towards those things. We gravitate towards things that are good, so towards things that are pleasant. And we describe things as either very good, somewhat good, not good at all. Pleasant, mildly pleasant, not pleasant. We live that way. So what the degrees of perfection argument says, it looks like in the world that there must be an ultimate goodness. There must be an ultimate perfection. There must be an ultimate hot. There must be an ultimate of everything that we live within change. And we think that those are defined beyond the physical plane. And such a standard would require God outside of the universe to describe those things that we call good. Otherwise, we could simply sit and argue about what does good really mean. It doesn't really mean anything unless there's an ultimate good to compare it to. So that's basically the degrees of perfection argument.
All right. Now, the next one is abiogenesis, or the origin of life. Where does life originate?
Yeah, we get life, which came from non-life somehow. At some point on this earth, we had non-living molecules, chemicals, that somehow became life. Even the simplest life form has no scientific explanation for how it came about, let alone complex life. A single cell is alive. And we described in other shows the characteristics of life. We won't go through all those on this show. But we can describe what life means. How did it come about? Now I'm going to take this in one direction because we're trying to simplify things. The complexity of the DNA molecule, which contains the information encoded to build the necessary parts of a living cell, infers a designer and points away from blind physical forces. That was said by Stephen Meyer in Signature of the Cell. Now, the discovery of the specified digital information in the DNA molecule provides strong grounds for a God. So we're calling DNA, you've got 4 bases, A, D, G, and T. And those are nucleotides, and they form an actual digital code of information that spell out how to make all the parts of the cell. Now, Doug, that's information. And we don't get information randomly. Can't find information unless there's a mind behind it.
Is there any life without DNA?
No.
So all
life has the DNA molecule somewhere, or an RNA molecule, it might, but it has to, all complex life obviously has DNA. You also have proteins. You have to have a minimum of plasma membrane, so you got a bilipid layer. You got to have, a DNA molecule that gives the commands. You got to have proteins. You got to have amino acids to make proteins. I mean, it's much more complex than that. I'm just saying, let's, for simplistic sake, because we can't go into all the details, just look at DNA.
Well,
because you got to have DNA to have life.
And we talked about this before. I think on some of the shows, or before or after the show, we talked about in order for the very first DNA, or the most simplest cell out there, you would have to flip the card, shuffle the cards, flip them up in the air, and they all land perfectly ace through king 4 times.
More than that.
Yeah, I mean, through all 4 decks, 4 suits, but do that multiple times.
Yeah, because digital information is like a computer. You have to have a computer programmer, right? DNA is digital coded information. So when you see information, now I use the example to make it simple. If you go into a casino and you're gambling and you sit down at a poker table and somebody throws out a royal flush 5 times in a row, you're not going to say, that guy's a really good poker player. You're also not going to say, that guy's really lucky. He's going to be run out of there with the police.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when you see information showing up like that, okay, you know it's a mind. You know that somebody's rigging it. The same type of thing would happen if I, flipped a coin 1,000 times and got a heads every time. What are you going to say? It's a weighted coin. I mean, this is set up. Right. You don't see information like that. You see randomness when you do that.
Certainly not. And in order to get the first DNA molecule and everything to work you would have to get it to like you said, have a royal flush multiple times, right?
Yeah.
In a row.
I mean, you're talking about odds that are astronomical to get DNA but here's the key to it, though. The key is this: DNA is information. And when we see information, we got to have a mind, just like a big banger's got to have a big bang's got to have a big banger. Information entails a rational mind, not randomness. You just don't get information. The other example I use that I heard somebody say one time, I don't remember who, they said if you come home and you see all the leaves arranged out in your yard spelling, hello, Dad. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to say, oh, the wind just happened to blow such that it blew the leaves into that arrangement. No, I'm going to say, my little kids went out and raked the leaves. And okay, you see, you always infer it.
Have to be a mind.
Now, that's only, 5 or 6 letters. We're talking about millions of base pairs in order to produce life. So it's a map.
Okay.
So that was, and I tell you, and more information on that, Stephen Meyer wrote a great book called Signature of the Cell about DNA.
Okay, we're doing good. We're halfway through. All right, so number 7 is rationality.
Yeah, also we could say consciousness or the rationality of the mind. Intelligence is part of what we find in the world. We all know what intelligence is. But this universe is not intellectually aware. The universe is aware of nothing, okay? You have simple consciousness in animals, but even that we don't know where it comes from. But when we look at the consciousness in human beings, we see people are able to self-reflect, they're able to do complex reasoning, and there's something separate from their mind. The mind is separate from the brain. People used to think that the brain produced the mind. That's not known anymore. The most recent neuroscience would say that the mind, the thing that makes us self-aware, conscious, the I behind, inside, that you're you. We don't know where that comes from. And it's highly unlikely, okay, that would come just from chemicals. If naturalism is true, C.S. Lewis argued, then it comes to leave us with no reason for believing it to be true. In other words, if chemicals just became into more complicated chemicals and eventually made rationality, then why would we believe that it was accurate? I mean, it just came from randomness, But we know that it is because we can make judgments. So self-awareness and rationality either came from blind forces or came from a mind. And the most likely thing is that it came from a mind. Matter has never been able to develop rationality that we've seen. But human beings have a consciousness or a rationality that looks to me like a mind is something different from the brain and that it came from a mind. The most likely thing is that the mind came from a mind, not from just chemicals. So that's basically the argument. Yeah.
All right. Number 8 is conscience.
Conscience. Now that's different than the moral argument because the moral argument is talking about moral facts that exist out there. Conscience is saying we have an internal guide inside of us that tells us right from wrong, good from bad. That we know what justice is, we know what goodness is, and we know what evil is when we see it. These principles drive us to know what's good, what charity is, and altruism. I mean, why would we ever do charity or altruism if we were just strictly animals doing behavior to exist? We wouldn't do that. There would be no basis for doing charity or altruism unless we had a conscience driving us to know what good and right is. Do you agree?
We had a whole show on that where we talked about the animals in the out on the Serengeti would just kill each other, and it's like, well, he didn't do it because he was mad at the other animal.
No, they just do it because they're surviving.
Right.
In other words, rape would be considered a good thing if there was no conscience to guide us, because rape would cause more reproduction. So the fact that we all know rape is wrong. Nobody disagrees with that unless they're a sociopath. And we say there's exceptions like in 0.1%, but those people are fallen. I mean, they have something wrong with them. But the vast 99.9% of human beings know what right and know what wrong is. Herd mentality or socialization would only seek to change us by behavior standards, not by an indwelling. See, that's the difference. An inside conscience you can't change. Herd mentality might change the external. What do you think's good? What do you think's bad? But we have an internal guiding force. I think everybody knows that. When you do something wrong, you're like, yeah, I shouldn't do this. We all know that. I think God is the only explanation for an internal conscience.
Okay. Yeah. Number 9 is desire. The desire argument.
We talked a little bit about that every natural desire we have has a potential fulfillment. Hunger, we have food. Okay? We want to have, we have a sexual drive, there's sexual intercourse. Just about any desire that we have, there's a fulfillment for. Now, that's any natural desire. Okay, that doesn't mean I can dream up, I want to be a baseball player and I can't be one. No, that's not a natural desire. But any natural desire has a fulfillment. It's a pretty strong argument that we all have a natural desire for something beyond this universe. Something, we all have a void for something that only can be fulfilled by spiritual. And we see this in religion. That's why we have religion. That's why everybody has a desire for some kind of relationship with God, or at least with spirit, okay, something beyond this life. And they all seek that in many different ways. But the fact that we have that desire, just like all other desires, there must be a fulfillment for it. And the only way that makes sense is that fulfillment is beyond this physical universe. It would have to be God.
Okay. Well, next one is beauty. Number 11.
We just talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a whole show.
Yeah. So we'll just briefly review the fact that beauty exists and we're able to enjoy it, and that it's out there and we're able to interpret things as beautiful. It kind of goes back to the purpose argument. It looks like it was put there for us to enjoy. And you mentioned seeing in monochromatic vision. We're able to see in color vision, and we're able to appreciate a beautiful sunset or a beautiful rose garden or anything like that. So many things. We can look at the tree line or the mountain line and say, man, that's just, it could have not been that way.
Well, and our three colors that we see, it doesn't do anything for herd mentality. What does it do? It doesn't
do anything for survival.
It doesn't do anything.
It doesn't increase survival. I don't see any way that beauty will increase survival enough to have all the beauty that we have. Maybe there are some instances
to be
where it
evolved,
does.
right?
Well,
why? Why does it need to be? How did that get into the system to evolve? I can see, three colors. You can only see monochromatic. How did that come about?
Right. Think about beauty in that when you see all this beauty, it's like, okay, if there was a little bit of beauty in the universe, we might say it's an accident. But there's a ton of beauty. And I look at it and say, it didn't have to be that way. The ocean doesn't have to be the way it is. The sand doesn't have to just happen to work so nicely to walk out on. And you could just go through many, many, many examples of the way beauty. And like I said before, when you see art, you look for an artist. And it's the same thing here. When you see that beautiful landscape, you think, I just don't think it's an accident. I think ultimately the concept of beauty can only be defined by a God that put it there. That's it.
Well, and so that he instilled beauty that, hey, you want the desire to think that's beauty? Or is it the other way around, that he put beauty out there and we desire it?
It's both. It's the ontological part of it. The big word says that he put it there and it exists, which is one argument. The second one is the epistemological argument, which says we're able to sense beauty. So it's both. It's actually, there's two different names for them, the ones you mentioned, but two big words to describe those. But I'll just end by saying, how likely is it that a non-purposeful, entropic, natural laws, blind forces would produce all the beauty that we see? It could, but I think it's unlikely. It could, but I think it's unlikely. It's more likely that a God did it. And they got to explain. An atheist has to explain why all the beauty. They got to explain it, and I think our explanation's better.
Yeah, why are we attracted to flowers? Why are we, how did that get evolved into our system? How are we attracted to to sand or oceans or anything like that? How does that get evolved?
Doesn't make you survive more.
Right.
It doesn't increase survival. It's something more beyond that. It's an aesthetic property that doesn't fit into scientific categories, which we mentioned in the other show. Science can only explain, okay, your retina is able to see these colors, it perceives it this way, but it doesn't explain why. And it doesn't explain the natural sense that we get, the peace that we get, the joy that we get from looking at it.
Right.
You can't really find any reason that enhances survival. So beauty's a good argument.
Right.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Number 11, religious experience.
Doug, many people of all different eras, of widely different cultures, have claimed to have experiences of the divine. Now, atheists can write this one off if they want, but I think it's inconceivable that so many people could have been so utterly wrong about the nature of reality and the nature of their own experiences. There exists a divine reality, I'm saying, that's out there that, we said the argument from desire means we want to experience it. But what about all the religious experience through all of time, through the world? People have experienced God in many different ways. It's not like 5 people. I mean, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people have experienced the divine in many different ways. I think you gotta add that on the list. That's a pretty big argument.
Well, you're talking about throughout time. Well, now there's billions of people on the earth now, but throughout time, there's all these people. How could all these people be wrong?
How could they all be wrong? I mean, even if, let's just say 50% of the people believe in God in the world. I don't know if it's that high. It might be higher, might be 40%. I don't know, but it's pretty high. It's probably half. I don't think that many people could be wrong. I mean, that they've experienced something of the religious ontology or the religious experience that have made them believe in the divine.
Well, even if it's 40% and only 10% of them are devout.
Serious. Okay, pious. Yeah, devout.
It's still that's a
big number.
That's still 10% of 40% is 4. Is that right? Yeah, 4 million.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah,
I mean, let's camp on this one just a minute because we got some time, and I think religious experience is a broad argument that's pretty powerful if you think about how many people are religious and the experiences that they claim to have had. Some people use miracles I didn't use that one as an argument for God, but it could come under this. I didn't use miracles. A lot of people use it because other atheists will just say it didn't happen. But religious experience you can't argue with. If there were only 50,000 people that ever had a religious experience or believed in God, then we'd be fighting an uphill battle. But let's look back through the ages. There's always been people have always experienced God.
Right. I mean, I'm sitting there trying to do the math. I'm sorry, I'm getting pretty slow here, but even if it was 4% of 7 billion people, what is that? 300 million people are devout.
Even religious? If that's the case, and we don't know that, it may be much higher than that. But yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but that's a lot of people to be wrong. And I would say, again, most of the studies show that 70 to 80% of people believe there's a God. Now, that's some of the older stuff from the 80s. But even today, studies show that over half of the people that you poll believe there's a God. Now, they have different versions of that God, but we're not talking about that. We're just saying the fact that there is a God. They may be deistic, they might be, Hindu, they could be Islamic, but could be Christian, could be Jewish, but they believe there's a God that created us.
Okay, number 12 is resurrection.
Doug, this is specific to Christianity, and it's the only one that's specific to Christianity. But it's such a powerful argument, then it changed the world 2,000 years ago. So we got to put it in. There are 4 major points that I'm going to list that all New Testament scholars agree on, even the ones who are atheists or agnostic. So there are a lot. Some people don't realize that. There are a lot of New Testament scholars. I'm talking about people who have PhDs in New Testament. People who have PhDs in Greek and New Testament literature. There are a lot of agnostics of those. Even they agree with these things. Number 1, the burial of Jesus, the death and burial of Jesus. Number 2, the discovery of his empty tomb. He wasn't there. Number 3, his post-mortem appearances. He had post-mortem appearances. And 4, the origin of the disciples' belief in his resurrection, which started the Christian faith. Those 4 points are not refuted by the vast majority, 90% of New Testament scholars. The fact that those things happen, in other words, the empty tomb can't be explained, the fact that he appeared to people, 500 people at one time, to all these the disciples, to Paul, and on, the fact that he appeared, and they believed it. Not only do they believe it, but they believed it enough to risk their life and start a religion. And by the way, I'll just throw this in, all of the disciples were martyred for their faith, yet they wouldn't recant. And we know that through various historical sources. Some atheists may try to fight me on that one, but we got pretty good proof that at least the vast majority of them were martyred for their faith. They were willing to die for something if they knew it was a lie, why would they die for it?
Right.
Now, you can die for something that you mistakenly think is true, but these guys were there. You see what I mean? This is playing the difference on that. I'm a Christian. I believe that Jesus Christ died for my sins and was resurrected. If somebody came in right now with a gun and said, if you don't recant that, I'm going to shoot you. If I die for that, I could die for something that I thought was true and I could be wrong. But these guys were there. So if they were willing to die for that, they knew it was a lie, or they knew it was true because they were there. They saw it.
That's right.
The fact that they're willing to die for that, and the fact that the church grew after that, is a great argument for God's existence. I mean, it's a supernatural claim, but
You're right. I mean, not a lot of people would die for something that's a lie.
I don't think anybody would. If they knew that he really didn't appear, I don't think those guys would have been martyred. I think they would eventually say, okay, if it's going to come to... Why? I mean, if you're going to die, eventually it's not worth it.
Right.
I mean, what's the point? They would not have died for a lie that they knew was a lie. So they had to believe that he really did appear to him and let him feel that. Now, that's a supernatural thing that proves that one time in history, a man was raised from the dead 3 days later. He was raised from the dead. He was who he said he was, and they saw him enough to start the Christian religion. So the resurrection of Jesus is a powerful argument for God's existence.
Okay. Number 13 is contingency, and we've
covered this before, yeah, but I had to include it in the 15. So just briefly, it's saying that all things come into being and go out of being. These are contingent things. And contingency, don't get hung up on the word. These are just things that could have existed or could have not existed. This chair, for example, your son. Well, he could have existed, could have not existed. Right?
And we talked about it. Okay, yeah.
The difference between that, yeah. So contingent things come into being and can go out of existence. In other words, they're not necessary. They don't have to exist, okay?
Okay.
The point of that is the universe is contingent because it didn't have to exist. We could have just as well had nothing. That's really the argument of contingency. Why not just have nothing? That's the argument. I mean, why do we have to have the universe? Why do we have to have life? Why do we have to have all these galaxies? We could have just as well had nothing. And the fact that we don't have nothing and we see all this stuff demands an explanation. The best explanation is that there was a creator, not that it just popped into existence out of nothing. This goes back again to the argument that nothing comes from nothing, right? I mean, you don't see rabbits popping into existence.
Right.
You don't see universes popping into, here's another universe. I mean, you don't see trees popping into existence. They come from something. And so this is kind of like the cosmological argument, but it's different. And people may not be able to tease out the difference, but they are different if you read up on them, because this is talking more about the fact that the universe is not an infinite regress, that it just doesn't keep going back infinitely. Because mathematicians say that infinites are actually absurd. There can be no infinite. So anyway, that's the contingency argument.
All right, number 14, the existence of a soul or the afterlife and ghost and
the existence of the afterlife and the soul. This is good argument. And I put it towards the end. Like I said, these are not in order. They're just all good arguments. But this is a really strong argument. There's good evidence that a non-physical, immaterial aspect of human beings exists within every human being. And that part of the person that gives them their free will, that gives them their rationality, that distinguishes them from the animal kingdom, the fact that that exists, I call the I behind rationality or volitional activity. When you close your eyes and you think who you are, there's an I inside of you that tells you, I am Doug Thorpe, I am Andy White, I know who I am, I have an awareness. I can do volitional activity like decide to raise my hand or turn this computer on or anything like that. The I behind that is immaterial, okay? Now, some of the proof for the soul and the afterlife are near-death experiences are probably one of the best, and we're going to have many shows on that and talk to a lot of near-death experiencers. But near-death experiences are not theory. They're actually part of the scientific literature. And the fact that people have died for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Now, these are not resurrections. These are people who've died and been resuscitated back, but they've had no life in their body. And then they've come back to life, and they explain an experience where they're detached from their body, and they're able to see the doctors. They're able to tell what happens outside of the building, in another room, what's going on. They heard and saw things that they could never have possibly seen when they're dead. That's a strong argument for there being something separate from the body that's immaterial. Now, I think it's pretty hard to think that if we have a soul that's separate from our material body, that there's not a God. I guess it's possible, but I think it's a long shot.
What about ghosts then?
Well, ghosts are a theory. You know, some people think ghosts exist, some people don't. But I'll tell you what, again, a lot of people have experienced ghosts.
So
spirits.
If you believe in ghosts, then there has to be a God.
I think so. I think there has to be an afterlife. That's what that means, right?
That's right.
So ghosts, so mediums. Mediums are able to, now as Christians, we're not supposed to deal with mediums. I'm not promoting it. Just saying, there are mediums that, now some of them are charlatans, okay? But there are some who are able to communicate with the other side. I've read some pretty good papers on this, where some people have the ability, a sixth sense, to communicate with the other side. If there's another side, there's an immaterial soul. Spiritual experiences, people that experience God in many different ways, experience the other side. Visits from ghosts or other beings that are not material. That's a pretty good argument for the soul. We're going to do a lot of shows on this, but I think the existence of the soul and the existence of a life beyond this that is not in this body, that this body is just a container and that we actually have a soul that goes on forever, pretty good argument for God.
Well, I think that's one of the strongest arguments for God is.
I do too.
That's something that
very hard to refute.
Right, and
really
we actually had Roger was on our show, and he talked about seeing
demons and ghosts.
And
angels.
So,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Okay,
all right.
And the last one is change.
Okay, this one's maybe a little bit hard to understand, but I'll try to simplify it. Let me say it this way. Nothing changes itself. And I think everybody would agree with that. Apparently, self-moving things like animal bodies are moved by desire or will. In other words, if you move your arm, it's because you want to move it, okay? When an animal or a human dies, the molecules remain, but the body no longer moves, right? The body just sits there. The soul went on, but the body can't move anymore, all right? So the universe is the sum total of all these moving things, however many they are. But the whole universe is in the process of change. It's moving and it's changing. Now we've already seen that change is in any being requires an outside force to actualize it, to make it happen. In order for change to happen, you have to have an outside force. Therefore, the universe is changing. There's some force likely outside of it that causing it to change, something transcendent to it. The most likely answer would be God.
This sounds like prayer. If you pray, then things change.
It could be. How would they change? That's an example of change. How could change happen outside of the physical? If it changes because of prayer, then it would have to be something beyond you. You couldn't do that. It's something supernatural causing it to change, right?
That's right.
Briefly, the change argument is like this. If there's nothing outside the material universe, then there's nothing that can cause the universe to change. But it does change. The universe has changed over time. So we're saying, even without prayer, we're just saying the universe changes. Therefore, there must be something in addition to the material universe to bring about change. Because things don't bring about change on their own. It's always something outside of them. So the argument from change is an argument for the existence of a creator. So those are the 15 arguments, Doug. We got through it in 49 minutes. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Didn't think we was going to do it.
Well, we can do many shows that go into each one of these and dissect down and drill down and go into a lot more of the philosophical and the scientific theory. But I think we've been able to hit pretty good proofs today for the fact that there is a creator. Okay. I think there is.
I think so.
Okay. Well, this is God Talk, where we rightly divide the line between science and faith.
And this is God Talk, where we faithfully examine science and reasonably examine faith. Thank you.
Please visit our website at godtalk.com. Our audio files can be found on iTunes, SoundCloud, and many other podcast platforms. You can find all of our God Talk videos by searching Dr. Andy and Doug on YouTube. Please visit our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/Dr. Andy and Doug.